In the remote valleys of Wyoming, 1884, survival was a silent, relentless battle. Amidst the frost-covered pines of the Wind River Mountains, a lone log cabin stood against the jagged peaks. Here, the dawn was pale, and the cold was absolute. Smoke barely whispered from the chimney, a fragile sign of life in the immense, frozen landscape. Inside, the hardship was just as palpable. Frost coated the walls, glinting in the dim light. A bucket of water sat partially frozen. Jacob Petro, a man in his early 30s, watched his own breath turn to vapor in the frigid air. He rubbed his hands together, a small, futile gesture against a cold that seemed to seep from the very logs of his home. His cast-iron stove was the heart of the problem. It glowed a furious red, consuming logs with a greedy crackle, yet its heat felt trapped, a tiny island in an ocean of icy air. Frost clung stubbornly to the planks, just inches away. It was a frustrating, inefficient warmth, a constant reminder of the imbalance between effort and reward. At night, sleep offered little rest. Jacob would lie stiffly on his bed platform, bundled in every blanket he owned, his eyes open, watching the moonlight illuminate the ice crystals forming on the walls. The howl of the wind was his only companion in the long, exhausting hours. Wasn't alone in his struggle. Across the valley, other cabins dotted the snow-covered expanse, each one pouring a thick column of smoke into the gray sky. It was a shared battle. Inside those homes, families huddled close to their own hungry stoves. Women wrapped their children in extra layers, their faces etched with worry. The air was damp, the future uncertain. For Jacob, the days became a grim cycle. Every evening he would be outside, chopping firewood until his arms ached. The crunch of his boots on the snow, the cloud of his breath in the fading light, it was a rhythm of determination against encroaching fatigue. But no matter how high he stacked the woodpile, it was never enough. Inside, he'd stare at the dwindling supply, a knot of concern tightening in his chest. The frost seemed to creep closer every day. He tried to voice his concerns, to suggest there might be a better way. In a small community meeting, surrounded by the tired, skeptical faces of his neighbors, Jacob spoke of efficiency, of a different kind of heat, but his words were met with doubt. One man scoffed openly, shaking his head. In a world where survival depended on proven methods, new ideas were a dangerous luxury. Defeated but not broken, Jacob returned to his cabin that night. By the flickering light of a single candle, he opened a worn leather journal, a relic from a past life. The yellowed pages were filled not with words, but with sketches, intricate diagrams of stone and heat. Here, in the quiet of his isolated cabin, was a forgotten knowledge. He saw detailed drawings of masonry stoves, of winding internal channels designed not just to burn fuel, but to capture and hold its warmth. The images sparked a memory, a soft, dreamlike vision of a distant past. He saw a European village nestled in the Carpathian Mountains, snow falling gently on stone cottages. From their windows, a warm, inviting glow emanated. He remembered stories of his grandfather's home, families sleeping soundly on large clay benches, kept warm all night by the radiant heat of a fire long since extinguished. It was a vision of safety, of a deep, abiding warmth that seemed a world away from his shivering reality. Returning to the present, Jacob stared into his own fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. An idea, an insight was forming. The contrast was stark, the inefficient, fleeting heat of his iron stove versus the slow, enduring warmth of stone and clay. When the first signs of spring began to thaw the land, Jacob started to work. He wasn't just planning, he was building. He gathered heavy field stones from a rocky slope near his cabin, his movements filled with a quiet, newfound determination. Down by the creek bed, he mixed clay and water, his hands disappearing into the cool, blue-gray mud. This wasn't just an experiment. It was an act of faith. Back in the cabin, he made an irreversible commitment. He tore up a section of his floor, exposing the cold earth beneath. This was the foundation, not just for a stove, but for a new way of living. Carefully, with the patience of a craftsman, he laid the first stones, setting them into a bed of clay mortar. He wasn't just copying the drawings. He was understanding them, feeling the logic in his hands. Slowly, the structure took shape. A massive firebox of stacked stone rose from the floor. He built the complex, winding flue channels inside, a hidden maze designed to force the hot gases to surrender their energy to the stone before escaping. The finished product was more than a stove. It was a piece of functional architecture, a stone platform that integrated seamlessly into his living space. It was a monument to cautious hope. The day of the test arrived. As evening fell, Jacob lit the first fire. Flames roared to life, a brief, intense burn, and then he waited. Cabin filled with a warm orange glow. He watched, anticipating the result. Time seemed to stretch as he waited for the heat to travel through the mass. Then he saw it. Close-up view of the stone surface showed the frost melting away, the heat radiating slowly, steadily into the room. That night, for the first time in months, Jacob slept peacefully. He lay on the warm stone platform, covered by only a light blanket. The mix of moonlight and fireglow filled the room with a soft, calm light. There was no shivering, no visible breath, only the profound relief of deep, restorative warmth. He awoke in the morning and touched the stones, still warm from the single fire hours ago. A faint smile crossed his face. It was a quiet, personal triumph. The proof was visible to the whole valley. While his neighbors' chimneys still billowed smoke, Jacob's cabin emitted only a thin, brief wisp in the morning. Inside their homes, the frantic cycle of feeding the fire continued. But for Jacob, a small armful of wood in the morning was all it took. He could close the firebox and trust the stone to do its work. When the next winter's blizzard hit, the real test came. Snow whipped violently against the cabin, a furious assault from the elements. But inside, all was calm. The air was stable, the warmth constant. The masonry stove was more than a comfort, it was a fortress. The old ways were failing. A neighbor's roof sagged under the weight of heavy, melted and frozen snow, a direct result of heat escaping through the roof. Inside Jacob's cabin, the beams remained dry. There was no heat loss, no ice buildup. Soon, curiosity overcame skepticism. His neighbors began to visit, stepping inside and removing their heavy coats in surprise. Their children touched the warm stones, their faces filled with wonder. Jacob, no longer a doubter's target, became a teacher. He calmly explained the principles, gesturing to the structure that had transformed his existence. As spring returned, melting the snow to reveal a valley that had survived, the change was already spreading. New cabins were being built, and this time they included the solid, reassuring mass of masonry. Jacob sat at his table, documenting his results in his journal, adding his own chapter to the old knowledge. As the sun set over the Wind River Mountains, casting a golden light on the peaks, the valley was quieter. The frantic plumes of smoke were gone, replaced by the faint, efficient whispers of a lesson learned and a legacy quietly built in stone and clay. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound innovations are not new, but rediscovered.